Chapter 15 of The Rejuvenation of Aunt Mary by Ann Warner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15 Aunt Mary Enthralled. Jack's aunt slept long and dreamlessly again, that thrice blessed sleep which follows nights abroad in the metropolis. When, toward 4 o'clock, Aunt Mary opened her eyes, she was at first almost as hazy in her conceptions as she had found herself upon the previous day.
"I feel as if the automobile was running up my back and over my head," she said, thoughtfully passing her hand along the machine's imaginary course. Then she rang her bell, and Janice appeared from the room beyond. "I guess you'd better give me some of that you gave me yesterday," the elderly lady suggested. "What do you think?"
"Yes, indeed," said Janice, and went at once and brought it in separate glasses on a tray, and mixed it by pouring, while Aunt Mary looked on with an intuitive understanding that passed instinct and bordered on a complete comprehension of things to her hitherto unknown.
"They'd ought to advertise that," she said, as she set down the empty glass a few seconds later. "There'd be a lot of folks who'd be glad to know there was such a thing when they first wake up mornin's after mornin's after anythin'. It's just what you want right off. It sort of runs through your hair and makes you begin to remember."
"Yes, ma'am," said Janice, turning to put down the tray and then crossing the room to seek something on the chimney piece. Aunt Mary gave a sudden twist, as if the drink had infused an effervescing energy into her frame.
"Well, what am I going to do today?" she asked.
"Mr. Denham has written out your engagements here," said Janice, handing her a jeweler's box as she spoke. Aunt Mary tore off the tissue paper with trembling haste, lifted the cover, and beheld a tiny ivory and gold memoranda card.
"Well, that boy!" she ejaculated.
"Shall I read the list aloud to you?" the maid inquired.
"Yes, read it."
So Janice read the dates proposed the night before, and Aunt Mary sat up in bed, held her ear trumpet, and beamed beatifically.
"I don't believe I ever can do all that," she said when Janice paused. "I never was one to rush around pell-mell, but I've always been a great believer in letting other folks enjoy themselves, and I shall try not to interfere."
Janice hung the tiny memoranda up beside its owner's watch, and stood at attention for further orders.
"But I don't know I'm sure what I can wear tonight," continued the one in bed. "You know my bonnet was run over yesterday."
"Was it?"
"Yes. It was the most sudden thing I ever saw. I thought it was the top of my head at first."
"Was it spoiled?"
"Well, it wouldn't do for me again, and I don't really believe it would even do for Lucinda. We didn't bring it home with us anyhow, and so it's no use talking of it any more. I'm sure I wish I'd brought my other with me. It wasn't quite as stylish, but it set so good on my head. As it is, I ain't got any bonnet to wear, and we're going in a box, Jack says. I should hate to look wrong in a box."
"But ladies in boxes do not wear anything," cried Janice reassuringly. Aunt Mary jumped.
"Not anything?"
"On their heads."
"Oh, well, then the bonnet half of me'll be all right, but what shall I wear on the rest of me? I don't want to look out of fashion, you know. My, but I wish I'd brought my Paisley shawl. I've got a Paisley shawl that's a very rare pattern. There's coconuts in the border, and a twisted design of monkeys and their tails done in the center. And there ain't a moth hole in it, not one."
Janice looked out at the window.
"I've got a cameo pin, too," continued Aunt Mary reflectively. "My, but that's a handsome pin, as I remember it. It's got Jupiter on it, holdin' a bunch of thunder and lightnin' and receivin' the news of somebody's bein' born. I used to know the whole story. But, you see, I expected to just be sittin' by Jack's bed, and I never thought to bring any of those dress-up kind of things." She sighed. Janice returned to the bedside. "Hadn't you better begin to dress?" she howled suggestively. "They are going to dine here before going to the theater, and dinner is ordered in an hour." "Maybe I had," said Aunt Mary. "But, oh dear, I don't know what I will wear." She began to emerge from the bedclothes as she spoke. "How would my green plaid waist do?" she asked earnestly. "I think it would be lovely," shrieked the maid. "Well, shake it out then," said Aunt Mary. "It ought to be in the fashion, all the silk they put in the sleeves. And if you'll do my hair just as you did it yesterday—" "Yes, I will." Then the labor of the toilette began in good earnest, and 3/4 of an hour later, Aunt Mary was done and sitting by the window while Janice laced her boots. A rap sounded at the door. "Come in," cried the maid. It was Jack with a regular faggot of American Beauties. "Well, Aunt Mary," he cried with his customary hearty greeting. "How?" "How what?" asked Aunt Mary, whose knowledge of Sioux social customs had been limited by the border line of New England. Jack laughed. "How are you?" he asked in correction of his imperfect phrasing, and then he handed over the rosewood. "I'm pretty well," said his aunt, "but, my goodness, you mustn't bring me so many presents. Jack stopped her words with a kiss. "Now, Aunt Mary, don't you scold, because you're my company and I won't have it. This is my treat, and just don't you fret. What do you say to your roses?" Aunt Mary looked a bit uneasy. "They're pretty big," she hesitated. "That's the fashion," said Jack. "The longer you can buy 'em, the better the girls like it. I tried to get you some 8 feet long, but they only had 2 of that number, and I wanted the whole bunch to match." He was interrupted by another rap on the door. "Hullo!" he cried. "Come in." It was Mitchell with several dozen carnations, the most brilliant yet prized, or priced. "Well, I declare!" exclaimed Aunt Mary. "For you, Miss Watkins," cried the newcomer, gracefully offering his homage, "with the assurance of my sincere regret that I came on the scene too late to have been making a scene with you 50 years ago." "I didn't quite catch that," said Aunt Mary rapturously, "but never mind. Granite, get a tin basin or suthin' for these flowers." "Where's Burnett?" Jack asked the newcomer. "Isn't he dressed? It's getting late." "He's all right," said Mitchell. "He and Clover are here they are." The two came in together at that second. Clover's mustache just showed over the top of the largest bunch of violets ever constructed, and Burnett bore with assiduous care a bouquet of orchids tied with a Roman sash. Aunt Mary leaned back and shut her eyes. If it hadn't been for her smile, they might possibly have feared for her life. But she was only momentarily stunned by surpassing ecstasy. "You'd better put some water in the bathtub, Granite," she said, recovering. "Nothing else will be big enough." The 4 young men drew up chairs and rivaled her smiles with theirs. "I don't know how I ever can thank you," said the old lady warmly. "I've always had such a poor opinion o' life in cities, too." "Life in cities, my dear Miss Watkins," screamed Mitchell, "is always pictured as very black, but it's only owing to the soft coal, not to the people who burn it." Aunt Mary smiled again. "I guess the bathtub will be big enough to keep 'em fresh," she said simply, and Mitchell gave up
and dried his forehead with his handkerchief. They dined at home upon this occasion, and afterwards took 2 carriages for the theatre. Aunt Mary, Jack, Clover, the American Beauties, and the Violets went in the first, and what remained of the party and the floral decorations followed in the second. "I mean to smoke," said that part of the second load which habitually answered to the name of Mitchell. "There is nothing so soothing when you have thorns in your legs as a cigarette in your mouth." "Two," laughed his companion. "Jimmy, but our aunt is game, isn't she?" "To my order of thinking," said Mitchell, thoughtfully scratching a match, "Aunt Mary has been hung up in cold storage just long enough to have acquired the exactly proper gamey flavor. It can't be denied that to worn, worldly, jaded mortals like you and me, the sight of fresh, ever-bubbling, youthful enthusiasm like hers is as thrilling and trilling and rilling as he paused to light his cigarette. "Yes, you'd better stutter," said Burnett. "I thought you were running ahead of your proper signals." "It isn't that," said Mitchell, puffing gently. "It is that I suddenly recollected that I was alone with you, and my brains tell me that it is a waste of brains to use them in the sense of a plural noun with you. The word in your company, my dear boy, only comes to me as a verb, as an active verb, and dear knows how often I have itched to apply it forcibly." Then they drew up in front of the theater and saw Aunt Mary being unloaded just beyond. "Great Scott, I feel as if I was part of a poster," said Burnett, diving into the carriage depths for the last lot of flowers. "I feel as if I were part of the revelation," said Mitchell. "I mean, the revel-oration." They rapidly formed on somewhat after the plan of the famous Marriage under the Directoire. Aunt Mary commanded the center rush, leaning on Jack's arm, and the rest acted as halfbacks, left wings, or flower bearers, just as the reader prefers. They made quite a sensation as they proceeded to their box, and more yet when they entered it. They were late, very late, as is the privilege of all box parties, and their seating problem absorbed the audience to a degree never seen before or since. Jack put Aunt Mary and her green plaid waist in the middle, and flanked her with purple violets and red carnations. The ear trumpet was laid upon the orchids just where she could reach it easily. Then her escorts took positions as a sort of half-moon guard behind, and each held 2 or 3 American Beauties straight up and down as if they were the insignia of his rank and office. The effect was gorgeous. The very actors saw and were interested at once. They directed all their attention to that one box, and at the end of the act the stage manager got the writer of the topical song on the wire and had a brand new and very apropos verse added, which brought down the house. Jack and his party caught on and clapped like mad. Aunt Mary beat the front of the box with her ear trumpet, and when Clover suggested that she throw some flowers to the heroine, she threw the orchids and came near maiming the bass viol for life. Burnett rushed out between acts and bought her a cane to pound with. Jack rushed out between more acts and bought her a pair of opera glasses. Mitchell rushed out between still further acts and procured her one of those Japanese fans which they use for fire screens, and agitated it around her during the rest of the evening. "Time of your life, Aunt Mary," Jack vociferated under the cover of a general chorus. "Time of your life."
"Oh, my," said Aunt Mary, heaving a great sigh. "Seems if I'd die when I think of Lucinda."
They got out of the theater somewhat after 11, and Clover took them all to a French café for supper, so that again it was pretty well along into the day after when Janice regained her charge.
"Granite,"
said Aunt Mary very solemnly, as she collapsed upon her bed 20 minutes later yet,
put it down in that memoranda for me, never to find no fault with nothing ever again. Never, not ever, not never again."
The second day after was that which had been set for Mitchell's yachting party. They allowed a day to lapse between, because a yachting party has to begin early enough so that you can see to get on board. Mitchell wanted his to begin early enough so that they could see the yacht, too. "A yacht, Miss Watkins," he said into the ear trumpet, "is a delight that takes daylight to delight in. If my words sound somewhat mixed, believe me, it is the effect of what is to come casting its shadow before. I speak with understanding and sympathy. You will know all later." Aunt Mary smiled sweetly. Sometimes she thought that Mitchell was the nicest of the three, times when she wasn't talking to Clover or Burnett. Jack took his aunt out to drive on the afternoon of the intervening day, and bought her a blue suit with a red tape round one arm, and some rubber-soled shoes, and a yachting cap and a mackintosh. There was something touching in Aunt Mary's joyful confidence and anticipation. She had never been cast loose from shore in all her life.
"When do you s'pose we'll get home?"
she asked Jack. "Oh, sometime toward night," he replied. She smiled with a trust as colossal as trusts usually are.
"I'm sure I shall have a good time," she said. "I always liked to see pictures of waves."
"You'll see the real things now, Aunt Mary," cried her nephew heartily. He was not a bit malicious, possessing a stomach whose equilibrium could not conceive of any other anatomical condition. Janice, however, had doubts, and on the morning of the next day her doubts deepened. She looked from the window and shook her head.
"Feel a fly?"
inquired Aunt Mary.
"No, I see some clouds," yelled her maid. "I didn't ask you to speak loud," said the old lady. "I always hear what you say, always."
Janice went out of the room and voiced her views of the weather to the proprietors of the expedition. The proprietors were having an uproarious breakfast on ham and eggs, all but Mitchell, who sat somewhat aloof and contented himself with an old and reliable breakfast food long known to his race. "Are you really going to take her up the Sound today?" the maid demanded of the merry mob. "I'm not," said Burnett. "It's the yacht that's going to take her. Pass the syrup, Jack, like the Jack you are." "Doesn't she feel well?" Jack asked, passing the syrup as requested. "If she doesn't feel well, of course we won't go." "I like that," said Mitchell. "When it's my day for my party, and my cook all provisioned with provisions for provisioning us all. How long do you suppose ice cream stays together in this month of roses, anyhow?"
"She is very well," said the maid quietly, "but it's blowing pretty fresh here in the city, and I thought that out on the Sound—"
"Blowing fresh, is it?" laughed Burnett. "Well, it'll salt her fast enough when we get out. Don't you fuss over what's none of your business, my dear girl. Just trot along upstairs and dress Dolly, and when she's dressed we'll take her off your hands." Jack appeared unduly quiet. "Do you think it's going to storm?" he asked Mitchell. Mitchell was scraping his saucer with the thrift that thrives north of the Firth of Forth and hatches yachts on the west shores of the Atlantic. "I don't think at all during vacation," he said mildly. "I repose and reap O's from other people." "If there was any chance of a storm?" said the nephew thoughtfully. "Fiddle-dee-dee," said Burnett impatiently. "What do you think yachts are for, anyhow? To let alone?" He looked at the maid as he spoke and pointed significantly to the door. She went out at once and returned upstairs to her mistress, whom she found quite restless to "get a goin'," as she expressed it. The boxes filled with yesterday's purchases were brought out at once, and Janice proceeded to rubber sole and blue serge Aunt Mary. The latter regarded every step of the performance in the huge 3-ovaled cheval glass, which had been wont to tell Mrs. Roscott things that every woman longs to know. When her toilette was complete, it must be admitted that as a yachtswoman Aunt Mary fairly outshone her automobile portrait. She studied herself long and carefully.
"I expect it'll be quite an experience,"
she said, with many new wrinkles of anticipation. "Yes," said Janice, with a glance at the fluttering window curtains, "I expect it will be." Aunt Mary went downstairs and was greeted with loud acclamations. The breakfast party broke up at once, and, while Janice phoned for cabs, Aunt Mary's quarteret of escorts sought hats, coats, etc. After that they all sallied forth and took their places as joyfully as ever. It was quite a long drive to where Lady Bell had been brought up, and they had to stop once to lay in 2 or 3 pounds of current literature.
"Do you read mostly?"
asked Aunt Mary. "It's best to be on the safe side," said Clover vaguely. Then they entered the tangle of docks and express wagons and obstacles in general, and Mitchell had great difficulty in finding where his launch had been taken to meet them. But at last they got Aunt Mary down a flight of very slippery steps and into a boat whose everything was labeled Lady Bell, and Mitchell said something, and they cast loose and were off.
"Seems rather a small yacht,"
said Aunt Mary, glancing cheerfully about.
"I ain't surprised that you'd rather come in nights."
"Bless your heart, Aunt Mary!" shrieked Jack. "This isn't the yacht. This is the way we get to her."
"Oh,"
said Aunt Mary blankly. "That's the yacht," yelled Burnett. "That white one with the black smoke coming out and the sail up." "What are they getting up steam for?" asked Clover. "The time to get up steam is when you get down sails generally." "They aren't getting up steam," said Mitchell. "They're getting up dinner. It looks like a lot of smoke because of the shadow on the sail. And speaking of getting up dinner, reminds me that the topic before us now is, how in thunder are we to get up Aunt Mary?" "Put a rope around her and board her as if she was a cavalry horse," suggested Burnett. "I scorn the suggestion," said their host. "If the worst comes to the worst, I can give her a back-up. But I trust that Aunt Mary will rise to the heights of the sail and the situation all at once, and not make me do any vertebraical stunts so early in the day." They were running alongside of Lady Bell as he spoke, and the first thing Aunt Mary knew, she and her party were attached to the former by some mysterious and not altogether solid connection.
"What do we do now?"
she asked uneasily. "I'll show you," laughed Burnett, and seizing 2 flapping ropes, he went skipping up a sort of step ladder and sprang upon the deck above. Aunt Mary started to emulate his prowess and stood up at once. But the next second she sat down extremely hard without knowing why she had done so. "Hold on, Miss Watkins," Mitchell cried hastily. "Just you hold on until I give you something to hold on to, and when you've got something to hold on to, please keep holding on to it, unless I tell you that the hour has come in which to let go again."
"I didn't quite catch that," said Aunt Mary, "but I'm ready to do anything you say if you only—"
And again she sprang up and again was thrown down as hard as before. "Look out!" cried Jack, springing to her side, and he got hold of his valuable relative and held her fast while Mitchell grasped the ladder and a sailor strove to keep the launch still. "Now, Aunt Mary," cried the nephew, "hang on to me and hang on to those ropes, and remember I'm right back of you."
"My Lord alive!" cried Aunt Mary,
turning her gaze upwards.
"Am I expected to go alone all that way to the top?"
"It'll pay you to keep on to the top," screamed Clover. "You'll have, comparatively speaking, very little fun if you hang on to the ladder all day, and you'll get so wet, too." "There's more room at the top," cried Mitchell. "There's always room at the top, Miss Watkins. Put yourself in the place of any young man entering a profession, and struggle bravely upwards, bearing ever in—"
"Oh, I never can,"
said Aunt Mary, recoiling abruptly.
"I never could climb trees when I was little. I never had no grip in my legs, and I just know I can't. It's too high, and it looks slippery, and I don't want to anyhow."
"What rot!" yelled Jack. "The very idea! Why, Aunt Mary, you know you can skin up there just like a cat if you only make up your mind to it. Here, Mitchell, give her a boost, and I'll plant her feet firmly. Now, have you got hold of the ropes, Aunt Mary?"
"Oh, mercy on me,"
wailed Aunt Mary.
"the yacht is turning around, and the harder I pull, the faster it turns."
"Catch her from above, Burr," Clover called excitedly. "Hook her with anything if you can't reach her with your hand."
"Oh, my cap!"
shrieked poor Aunt Mary, and the cap went off, and she went on up and was landed safe above. "How on the chart do you suppose we'll ever unload her?" Jack asked, wide-eyed, as he swung himself quickly after her. "What man hath done, man can do," quoted Mitchell sententiously, following his lead. "But no man ever unloaded Aunt Mary," Clover reminded him as they brought up the rear. Then they were all on deck, a chair was brought for the honored guest, and Mitchell introduced his sailing master, who had been drawn to gaze upon the rather novel manner in which she had been brought aboard. "I want Miss Watkins to have the sail of her life, Renfrew," said Mitchell. "We aren't coming back until night." "We'll have sail enough sure, sir," said Renfrew, touching his cap, and then he walked away and the work of starting off began. A tug had been engaged to tow them out into the breeze, and Jack thought it would be nice to show Aunt Mary around while they were being meandered through coal barges, etc. They went below, and Aunt Mary saw everything with a most flattering interest.
"I don't know but I'd enjoy a little yacht of my own," she said to Mitchell. "I think it's so amusin' the way everything turns over to something else. I suppose Joshua could learn to sail me. I wouldn't want to trust no new man, I know."
"Why, of course," said Jack, "and we could all come and visit you, Aunt Mary." Aunt Mary smiled hospitably.
"I'd be glad to see you all any day," she said cordially, "and I shall have a hole in the bottom of the boat for people to go in and out of, and a nice staircase down to it, so you needn't mind the notion of how you'll get on and off."
They all laughed, and continued the tour below, and Aunt Mary grew more and more enthusiastic for quite a while. She liked the kitchen, and she liked the dining room. She thought the arrangement for keeping the table level most ingenious. Mitchell took her into the main cabin, and told her that that was hers for the day. On the dresser was a photograph of the Lady Belle framed in silver, which the young host presented to his guest as a souvenir of the voyage. Aunt Mary's pleasure was at its height. Oh, the pity of fate which makes the apex of everything so very limited as to standing room! 3 minutes after the presentation and acceptation of the photograph, Aunt Mary's glance became suddenly vague, and then especially piercing.
"What makes this up and down feeling?" she asked Mitchell.
"What up and down feeling?" he asked, secure in the good conscience and pure living of an oatmeal breakfast. "I don't feel up and down."
"I do,"
said Aunt Mary abruptly.
"I want to be somewhere else."
"You want to be on deck." said Burnett, suddenly emerging from somewhere. "I know the symptoms. I always have 'em. Come on. And when we get up there, I'll collar Jack for urging those 6 last griddle cakes on me this morning."
"I ain't sure I want to be on deck," said Aunt Mary. "Dear me, I feel as if I wa'n't sure of anythin'."
"What did I tell you?" said Burnett to Mitchell. "It's blowing fresh, and neither she nor I ought to have come. You know me when it blows." "Shut up," said Mitchell, hurrying Aunt Mary up the companionway and shoving her into one chair and her feet into another. "There, Miss Watkins, you are all right now, aren't you?" "What's the matter?" said Jack, coming from somewhere aloft or astern. "Heaven bless me, what ails you, Aunt Mary?"
"I don't wonder I'm pale," said Aunt Mary, faintly. "Oh, oh!"
"We must put our heads together," said Burnett, taking a drink from a flask that he took out of his pocket. "I must soon put my head on something, and your aunt looks to me to feel the same way. Mitchell, why did you let me forget that vow I made last time to never come again?" "Your vows to never do things again are about as stable as your present hold on an upright position," said Clover, laying a steadying hand upon his friend's waveringness. "Sit down, little boy, sit down." Burnett sat down, Mitchell smiled, Jack laughed, and Aunt Mary groaned. The boat was rising and falling rapidly now, and as she ran further and further out into the ever freshening wind, she kept on rising and falling yet more rapidly. The more motion there was, the more Aunt Mary seemed to sift down in her 2 chairs. "We'd better put back," said Jack. "This won't do, you know. How do you feel now, Aunt Mary?" he added, leaning over her. Aunt Mary opened her eyes and looked at him, but made no reply. "Ask me how I feel if you dare," said Burnett, from where his chair was drawn up not far away. "I couldn't kill you just now, but I will some day, I promise you." He was very white and had a look about his mouth that showed that he meant what he said. Some bells rang somewhere. "That's dinner," exclaimed Clover. Aunt Mary gave a piercing cry.
"Oh, take me somewhere else," she said, throwing her hands up to her face. "Somewhere where there'll never be nothin' to eat again. I can't bear to hear about eatin'."
"I'm going to take her down into one of the cabins," said Jack hastily. "She belongs in bed."
"No, turn back the carpet and lay me in the bathtub," almost sobbed the poor victim. "I don't feel like I could get flat enough anywhere else."
"She has the proper spirit," said Burnett faintly. "Only I don't feel as if I could get flat enough anywhere at all. What in the name of the Great Pyramid ever possessed me to come?" Mitchell rose quickly to his feet. "You put your aunt to bed, Jack," he said, "and I'll put my yacht to backing. This expedition is expeditiously heading on to what might be termed a failure. I can see that, even if we're only in a sound." "When do you suppose we'll get back?" the nephew asked anxiously. "About 4 o'clock, if we don't lose time by having to tack."
"I didn't quite catch all that," said Aunt Mary, "but I knew something was loose all along. I felt it inside of me right off at first, and ever since, too."
Jack gathered her up in his arms and bore her tenderly away to the beautiful main cabin.
"I wanted to live to change my will," she said sadly as he laid her down, "but somehow I don't seem to care for nothin' no more." He kissed her hand.
"They say being seasick is awfully good for people, Aunt Mary," he yelled contritely. Aunt Mary opened her eyes.
"John Watkins, Jr. Denham," she said, "if you say food to me again ever, I'll never leave you a penny, so there."
Jack went away and left her. "Come on to dinner, Burnett," Clover called hilariously. "There's liver with little bits of bacon, your favorite dish." Burnett snarled the weakest kind of a snarl. "I thought I'd suffered enough for 1 year last month," he murmured in a voice too low to be heard, and then he knew himself to be alone on deck. Down in the little dining saloon the dishes were hopping merrily back and forth, and an agreeable odor of agreeable viands filled the air. Clover and Jack sat down opposite their host, and they all three ate and drank with a zest that knew no breaking waves nor sad effects. "Here's to our aunt," said Clover gaily, as the first course went around. "Of course, we all love her for Jack's sake, but at the same time I offer 2 to odds that it is a pleasure to converse in undertones occasionally. Who takes?" "Aunt Mary being laid upon her bed," said Mitchell, "we will next proceed to lay the motion of our honorable friend upon the table. We regret Aunt Mary's ill health while we drink to her good, quotation marks under the latter word. Aunt Mary! And may she arise and prosper all the way down to the launch again." "I'm troubled about her, really," said Jack soberly. "We ought to have brought someone to look out for her." "The maid!" cried Mitchell. "The dainty, adorable maid! Here's to Janice and—" His speech was brought to a sudden end by his 2 guests nearly disappearing under the table. Jack started up. "Ginger, did you feel that?" he asked. "That's nothing," said Mitchell, calmly replacing the water carafe, which in the excitement of the moment he had clasped to his bosom. "It's the waves which are rising to the occasion. That's all." But Jack had hurried out. He found poor Aunt Mary writhing in an agony of misery.
"Oh, oh," she cried. "I want to be still. I'm too much tipped, and all the wrong way. I want to lay smooth, and I want to stand on my head all the—"
"We're going back," said Jack, striving to soothe her. "Lie still, Aunt Mary, and we'll soon get there. Do you want some camphor to smell?"
"I don't feel up to smellin',"
wailed Aunt Mary.
"I don't feel up to anythin'. Go 'way, right off."
Jack went on deck. He found Burnett stretched pale and green upon the chairs their lady guest had vacated. "If you speak to me again," he said in halting accents, "I'll never speak to you again. Get out." Jack went back to his place at dinner. "How are they?" asked Clover. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but there's a big storm coming up. The sky's all dark blue and it looks bad." "I don't care," said Mitchell, sawing into the game with vigor. "If we go down with Aunt Mary, and if I were Uncle Mary, I wouldn't feel happier and safer as to all concerned. The ship that bore Caesar and his fortune had nothing at all to bear compared with this which bears Jack and his. Here's to Jack and his fortune, and may we all survive the dark blue sky." "I tell you it's serious," said Jack. As he spoke, another ominous heaving set the bottles tipping, and nearly sent Clover backwards. "And I'm serious," exclaimed Mitchell. "I'm always serious, only I can never get any girl to believe it. Here's to me, and may I grow more and more serious each—" A tremendous wave bore the yacht upright, and then let her fall on her forelegs again. Clover went over backwards, and the dish of peas to which he had just been helping himself followed after. "You didn't say 'excuse me' when you left the table," said Mitchell, whom the law of gravitation had suddenly raised to a pinnacle from which he viewed his friends with mirthful scorn. "And if you've hurt yourself, it must be a judgment on you for leaving the table without saying 'excuse me.' Here's to Clover, who has a judgment and a dish of peas served on him at the same time for leaving the table without saying, "Excuse me." The sailing master appeared at the door, his cap in his hand. "I beg your pardon, sir," he said respectfully, "but I fear it's impossible to get back. We can't turn without getting into the trough of the sea." "All right, go ahead then," said Mitchell. "Go where we must go, and do what you've got to do. My motto is, Veni, Vidi, Vici, which freely translated means, I can sleep a sea when I can't sleep ashore." "But Aunt Mary?" cried Jack, blankly. "She's all right," said Mitchell. "She'll soon reach the cold burnt toast stage, and when she reaches the stage, we'll all welcome her into any chorus. Here's to choruses in general, and one chorus girl in particular. I haven't met her yet, but I shall know her when I do, for she will look at me. Up to now they've all looked elsewhere, and at other men. If my fortune was only in my face, it might draw some interest, but—" Lady Bell careened violently, and Clover went over backwards for the second time with Much in his wake. "Oh, I say," said Mitchell, rising in disgust. "If you want everything on the table at once, why, take it. Only I'm going on deck. After you've bathed in the gravy, you can have it. Ditto the other liquids. Jack and I are going up to dance a hornpipe and sing for Burnett. He looked rather ennuied to me when we came down." Along toward 8 o'clock that night, Lady Bell anchored somewhere in the Sound and tugged vigorously at her cables all night. With the dawn she was headed back towards New York. "As a success, my entertainment has been a failure," said Mitchell to Jack as they walked up and down the deck after breakfast. "But into each life some rain must fall, and I offer myself as a sacrificial background to Aunt Mary's glowing, living pictures of New York." "I wish you hadn't, though," said Jack. "She'll never want a yacht of her own now. And how under Scorpion are we ever going to land her?" "In a sheet, my able-bodied young friend, in a sheet," said Mitchell, clapping him on the back. "Don't you know the 'weigh the baby' game? It may double her up a bit, but the redoubtable Janice will straighten her out again. Here's to the sheet, be it a wet sheet, a main sheet, or a sheet with your Aunt Mary tied up in it." Mitchell was as good as his word, and they landed Aunt Mary in a sheet. The very harbor tugs stopped puffing and stood open-mouthed to stare at the performance, but it was an unalloyed success, and Aunt Mary was gotten onto dry land at last.
"I don't want to do nothin' for a day or two," she said as they drove to the house. Janice had the bed open and a hot water bottle down where Aunt Mary's feet might be expected, and all sorts of comfort ready to hand. "I'm so glad to see you safe back," she said, almost weeping. "I don't believe it's broke," said Aunt Mary, "but you might look and see. Oh, Granite, She stopped and looked an unutterable meaning. "It stormed, didn't it?" said the maid. "Stormed?" said Aunt Mary. "I guess it did storm. I guess it hurricaned. I know it did. I'm sure of it." "But you're safe now," said the girl, tucking her up as snugly as if she had been an infant in arms. "Yes, I'm safe now," said Aunt Mary. "But," she looked very earnest, "but, oh, my Granite, how I did need that white fuzzy stuff to drink this morning. I never wanted nothin' so bad in all my life afore." Janice stood by the bed, her face full of regret that Aunt Mary had known any aching void. Aunt Mary grew yet more earnest. "Granite," she said, "you mind what I tell you. That ought to be advertised. I should think you could patent it. Folks ought to know about it."
Then she laid herself out in bed.
" My heavens alive !" she sighed sweetly. " There's nothin' like home. Not anywhere. Not nowhere."
End of chapter 15.